everyone, and welcome to my February wrap-up. I'm going to be honest, I have been dreading filming this video because I had a very mediocre reading month, as in I read a lot of 3-star books, and for me, 3-star books are like the worst thing for me to review. Like, I would rather review a bunch of 1-star books than a bunch of 3-star books. I might be the only one that feels that way, but I'm just saying. Nonetheless, let's jump into the wrap-up. I have 8 books to talk about, but I actually only read 7 books in February, so the reason for that is because I filmed my January wrap-up a little early, and then I ended up finishing another whole book, so I thought we would talk about that book here, and that is Bad Romance by Heather Demetrios. This is a young adult contemporary book. We follow our main character called Grace, and she lives with her mom and her stepdad and her half-brother, and she doesn't have a very good relationship with her mom and her stepdad because they're actually very abusive towards her, and she also finds herself in a relationship with a boy at her school who is kind of like the coolest dude at school. Like, everybody would want to go out with him, so it almost seems like a fairy tale, like Disney movie kind of dream come true that she is going out with this guy, until he also ends up being very abusive towards her. So we're just kind of following Grace as she navigates through her life dealing with these two very abusive relationships. So I really liked this book. I was gonna say enjoyed, but that seems like a weird word to use with this kind of story. It definitely isn't the kind of story to be enjoyed given the subject matter, and I do of course have to give a trigger warning for abuse, both romantic and from a parent, as well as suicide, self-harm, and sexual assault. This is actually the kind of book that I feel is best recommended to people that haven't been in these kinds of situations before, because it's really easy for those people to pass judgment onto the people that have been in these situations. And like, I mean, I'm guilty of it too. Like, you don't really understand looking from the outside, but like, we've all heard somebody say like, why didn't you just leave him, or why didn't you do this, or it could have been easy to just do that. And I think these books, or in this book in particular, does a really good job of putting you into the main character's shoes and really into her feelings and her situations to be able to understand why it's not that easy to do when you're right in the middle of it happening. Another book that deals with this topic very well is It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover. This is a young adult book, but that book is I guess new adult, but like adult. So if you want something similar but in the adult genre, I would definitely recommend that book. Both of these books handle the topic so well and really do well at like kind of putting you into the situation and showing you what it really is like to be in those kinds of situations. I mean, obviously it's not exactly the same because you're not actually in the situation, but I think it gets you as close as you can be without actually being in one. So yeah, this is the one book that I read in January. Now we're going to move on to the 7 books that I read in February, and this month I'm actually going to switch it up in the order that I show you these books, because usually I'd show you in the order that I read them, but I thought we'd switch it up and I would show you in the order of least to most favorite, so by rating, starting off with my least favorite books. And let me know in the comments if there's a particular way that you prefer, if you like it from least to most favorite or in the order in which I read them, or if you don't really care, let me know in the comments. So, starting off with my least favorite book, we have Tweet Cute by Emma Lord. Now, I'm just going to say straight off the bat that this is like a personal preference book because so many people loved this book and I did not like it. So I've already explained the synopsis of this book so many times on my channel, and if I enjoyed it, I wouldn't mind explaining it again, but I didn't enjoy it, so I don't really want to, but I'm going to anyway, just in case you're new here. So this book we're following, it's a young adult book set in New York City. We're following 2 characters, Pepper and Jack. They're both high school students, and they are duking it out on Twitter in a little Twitter war, but they're fighting on each other's family's restaurant Twitter accounts, so they don't actually know who the other person is, while at the same time they're kind of falling for each other on an anonymous chat app. So that's basically the premise of the story, and yeah, I didn't really like it, and that is because this is recommended, or it's like marketed as a like young adult contemporary romance book, and something that I've been noticing a lot when reading young adult romances is that they tend to really lack in the romance department, and maybe they have always been like this and I'm only just noticing now because I'm reading a lot more adult romance. But I'm not just talking about like steamy scenes, I just mean like any kind of romance in general. Like for the first half of this book at least, there is no chemistry between the characters. There's no like romantic tension. So when they finally like talk about having feelings for each other more than halfway through the book, it just doesn't really feel realistic because there was absolutely no chemistry or tension or just anything before that. So for me, it's just really boring for most of the book, and then we get into like the romance side of it, which just doesn't feel realistic to me anymore. So yeah, this was all a bit of a disappointment, but again, it's definitely personal preference because so many people I know really loved this book. So my concluding thought is read at your own discretion. The next book that are my second to least favorite book on the list, I was going to say the next book that I read, but I forgot we're going in a different order. We have Across the Green Grass Fields by Seanan McGuire. This is the 6th book in the Wayward Children series, which is a young adult series of portal fantasy books. So this book can actually be read as a standalone, and it is kind of marketed as a good jumping on point for new readers, which personally I would just say if you are a new reader to this series, just start with the first book because that one is one of my all-time favorite books and for me is the best one in the series. So I would just start with the first one. I wouldn't recommend starting with this one, but technically you could. Now, I actually did a reading vlog when I read this book, and in that video I go super in depth in the story and the series just in general, as well as my thoughts on this book. So I'm going to leave a link to that reading vlog up in the card in the corner. I believe it's the first book that I talk about, but I have the video broken down into timestamps, so if you want to skip around to the different books you can. But to avoid repeating my thoughts here, I'm just going to direct you over to that video. I will give you a little summary of it over here though. So in this book we follow our main character called Reagan. For the majority of the book she is 10 years old, and in school she's starting to notice that all of the other girls are going through puberty and their bodies are changing and hers isn't. So she brings this up to her parents, and her parents tell her that she was actually born intersex. And not really knowing how to handle this information, she ends up confiding in one of her school friends who does not take the information very well. Reagan gets very upset and ends up running into the woods through a portal into a world called the Hooflands, which is just full of creatures that have hooves. So yeah, this for me, it wasn't my least favorite book in the series. Actually, unpopular opinion, I think my least favorite one is either Down Among the Sticks and Bones or Come Tumbling Down, which I know is a lot of people's favorites. So this is probably my third least favorite in the series, but it's still, I just don't know if some of the subject matter in here was handled very well. I also feel like the reason that the first book in the series is my favorite is because it actually all takes place in our world, and anytime we actually go through a portal in one of these books, I'm always disappointed in the world building. I just always feel like we get the bare bones of world building. I also feel like maybe some of the horse nostalgia in this book was lost on me, because I can totally see how anybody who was like that kid in school that was really into horses, which I knew a few of these kids growing up, I think this would be so nostalgic for those people, and it wasn't for me. But yeah, so all of those things combined just didn't make this book my favorite, on top of the fact that I wasn't super invested in the characters or anything like that. The things that I did like about this book, because I probably would have settled on like a 2.5 star rating, so I didn't completely hate it by any means. So the things that I did like was that we had intersex rep, even though I don't know if it was handled the best, but I don't have any experience in that, so I don't think I can really have an opinion on it. Also, there was a twist at the end of the story that I actually really liked and I didn't see coming. Unfortunately, this book is so short that we never got to fully explore that twist, which was a little bit disappointing. So yeah, there is that book. Moving on to the third least favorite on my list. I'm really not sure how to introduce all of these books because I'm not used to doing it in this order, but we have basically the epitome of mediocre. This book landed right on a 3-star read, and that is The Last House Guest by Megan Miranda. This is an adult mystery book. We're following our main character called Avery, and a year previous to when the book takes place, Avery's best friend is found dead after accidentally falling or purposefully jumping off of a cliff. Either way, it was ruled as like a suicide, but Avery doesn't think that her friend would do that, and so a year after that happens, which is when the book takes place, place, Avery starts to find some clues that might point towards more foul play. So the reason I landed on a 3-star rating for this book is really because the first half of the book was super slow and just kind of boring for me, to be completely honest. There were also, every few chapters, there were flashback chapters to the year previous, and those chapters were fine, but then during the present timeline chapters, our character would still, like, reminisce a lot and bring up things from the past, and it would basically be like having a flashback within the chapter, and I don't do well with those super well, especially when they were happening as often as they were in this book, because I'm just the kind of person where if I'm not fully focusing on it, then sometimes I can get really confused as to whether we're in the present or whether we're having like a little flashback moment. So I did find myself during the first half of this book being a little confused, and when I wasn't confused, I was just kind of bored because everything was happening very slowly. But then during the second half of this book, when more secrets start to unravel, I started to get more into the story, and then the ending happened, and I did think that it was a very good ending. So it just kind of left me at a 3 stars because while the ending was good, it still had a really slow, kind of boring beginning. Once again, I'm pretty sure this is just a personal preference thing because, again, I know so many people that loved this book and gave it 5 out of 5 stars, so I do think that I have kind of moved on from the mystery genre. Like, I'm definitely more of a thriller person when it comes to things that deal with mysteries, if that makes sense, whereas this one is very much like, it's just a mystery. You're not going to get, like, the suspenseful, edge-of-your-seat kind of moments, so I think that's where this book kind of lost me. But yeah, if you're really into mysteries, I would, like, more specifically even recommend this to people who are, like, YA mystery readers and they want to get into the adult mystery genre, because for me this just hit me a little bit more almost as a YA book than an adult book. Next up, we have The Devouring Gray by Christine Lynn Herman. This is the first book in a young adult paranormal fantasy duology, I guess. In this book, it is set in a small town in upstate New York, and in this town there is this thing called the Devouring Gray, which I actually don't remember if it was really explained what it was in this book. I think it's going to be more explored in the second book, but it's basically this thing where if a regular old civilian happens to wander into the Gray, they basically die. And so there were these 4 very prominent families in this town that had special abilities, and they would basically protect the town from the Gray. So we're following 3 main characters in this book, and each one of them is a descendant from one of these powerful is what I meant to say, families. So yeah, that's basically the synopsis I'm going to give you. This is, again, kind of the epitome of a mediocre read because literally every aspect of this book I just thought was fine. Like the writing, the characters, the plot, the world building, just everything about it was just fine. So I don't have anything bad to say about it, but I also don't really have anything particularly good to say about it. When I did my reading vlog of this, I mentioned that the best way I can really describe my thoughts on this book is that I liked it enough to not DNF it, but I don't know if I liked it enough to read the sequel. And I did put the sequel on my March TBR, but I think if I'm not, like, really into that book within the first, like, 50 to 100 pages, I'm probably going to DNF the sequel. So this was probably the most unhelpful review ever, but that's all. So next up we have another book that I read during that other reading vlog, and that is Darling Rose Gold. This is a adult thriller, I guess you would call it, and in this book we're following 2 different people, Rose Gold and her mother, Patty Watts, and for the first 18 years of Rose Gold's life, she was living in and out of hospitals, she was in a wheelchair, supposedly she had all of these horrible medical conditions, but no matter how many doctors she saw or procedures she had done, nobody could really figure out what was wrong with her, but it turns out that her mother Patty was just a really good liar and was actually inflicting a lot of these problems on her by poisoning her through her food. So when this is found out, Patty goes to jail and she's there for 5 years, and when she comes out of jail, she doesn't really have anywhere to go, and everyone is very surprised when it is Rose Gold that is there to pick her up when she gets out of jail, but Rose Gold is not the sickly little girl that she was when she first went to jail. So that is essentially the premise of this story. This is, if you couldn't really get from the synopsis, a story primarily about revenge, and I think the like moral idea behind this book, or the moral question, is if somebody does something horrible, is it okay to do something horrible to them? Once again, I'd refer back to that reading vlog if you want to get like my really in-depth thoughts on this book, but for the most part I would settle on like a 3.5 star rating. It would have been 4 stars except for the ending. So for the ending of this book, which as a thriller we know that the twists or the ending is what really makes or breaks the book, and for me the ending was one, predictable, which for me doesn't automatically make it a bad ending, but the fact that it was predictable, but then on top of that I found it to be very unrealistic. Like, I just didn't fully buy the ending, so that just kind of ruined it for me. But I still won't discredit the rest of the book because genuinely these are some of the best written characters I have ever read, and again, I talk about it really in depth in that video, but the way that the author wrote these characters, and especially like the mother's character, she's so twisted, like I can't even properly explain it to you. On the flip side though, they are incredibly unlikable characters, and not even just the 2 main characters, but almost all of the characters in this book are very unlikable, and it's not because they're like written badly or anything. Like, there is a reason that they are unlikable, but as a very character-driven reader, it did make it a little bit difficult to get through this book because I just had nobody to root for. And I don't even mind like morally gray characters, but like these characters went past morally gray. Like, they're just so unlikable. So overall, I think the writing was incredible, and I would totally pick up whatever book this author writes in the future. I think this was a debut, but I'm not 100% sure. But I think as far as the like ending of this book goes, it could have done with a little bit of help. As far as the unlikable characters, I do actually think that that's more of a personal preference thing. Once again, if we can get anything from this video, it's that books are very subjective and it's all up to personal preference. Now moving on to my second favorite book of the month, which was actually an audiobook, and that is The Killer Across the Table by John E. Douglas. This is basically a must-read for true crime fans. If you don't know who John Douglas is, he is a like famous, I suppose, criminal profiler slash investigator, I think you would call him, and he is like known for going to prisons and interviewing these serial killers or predators and really getting inside their head and profiling them. And the like main question behind this book is the idea of like nature versus nurture, and whether the people that commit these violent crimes are born that way or if it's something that they are like made into. In this book we follow 4 specific cases, and he breaks down all of the cases as well as the like history and the childhood and upbringing basically of all of the serial killers or predators, and then he goes over the interview that he had with them. And while it only specifically follows 4 cases, it actually touches on so many different cases, and like this guy has interviewed everybody, like Ted Bundy, Charles Manson. At times it almost felt like he was like name dropping the most famous serial killers that he has interviewed, but he has literally like interviewed them all, and it is extremely interesting to read this book. One of my favorite parts of this book actually was very brief, and it is when he mentions the JonBenet Ramsey case. And I don't know, because I know that there's a bunch of like Netflix documentaries that have come out about this case recently, and I haven't seen any of them. But when I first heard about the JonBenet Ramsey case, which would be like, I don't know, like 5 years ago or something like that, I had a very unpopular opinion because a lot of people thought that the parents did it, and I didn't think that. And then reading this book, he just briefly mentions that he also didn't think that the parents did it, just using his criminal profiling knowledge. He doesn't think that it makes sense that the parents did it. And I felt very validated in my feelings because back when I first heard about it, that was a very unpopular opinion. And like I said, I don't know if the opinions have changed as of lately, but I just thought that was like the most interesting part of this book for me. But that's what I mean about he like touches on so many different cases, but it does specifically follow 4. And they're actually the 4 that it follows are ones that I've never heard of before, so it was really interesting learning about those also. And I do feel like he handled this topic very respectfully. Besides the feeling of him like name dropping famous serial killers, I do think it handles this topic well, because while it is very interesting to learn about these people and get inside their heads and stuff like that, we always have to remember that all these people had victims, and I think it handled the topic respectfully. So yeah, that was my second favorite book of the month, and I would totally recommend this to true crime fans. And of course, trigger warnings for brutal murder and sexual assault and worse, and it's just, there's descriptions of it, so just be aware before picking this book up. So now on to my favorite book of the month, which if you've watched any of my recent reading vlogs, you probably know what it is. That is the one by John Mars. This is an adult thriller book in which there is this dating site where you send in your DNA and then they genetically match you to your soulmate, and it is like super successful. Like every person that has been matched does end up with their soulmate, and it has broken up a lot of couples. So in this book we follow 5 people that use this site and get matched to their soulmate, but with each one of them there is a twist to the story, which I would love to tell you about, but this book, it hits you with twists like 50 pages in, and so I don't want to ruin that shock for you, because let me tell you, when I started reading this book, like I was shocked like 20 pages in, and it doesn't stop there. Like it will keep hitting you with twists. Every time you think surely there can't be any more, it hits you with another one, and it's not like forced or too much or anything. This book is so well written and it's just weaved together so well, and you don't see any of it coming. So I would totally recommend this book to thriller fans. And also I feel like the concept of it is not something that I've ever read before in a thriller, so it did feel really refreshing, because to be honest, at this point I do feel like the thrillers that I read all feel like something I've read before, so it was really nice to read this book and feel like I was reading something totally new. So yeah, I would totally recommend this book. If you can't tell, I really enjoyed it. Also, if you're somebody that loves short chapters, this is the book for you, because it helps me fly through this book, and I love short chapters, and I don't think we get enough of them. So those are all of the books that I read in February, plus that one extra book in January. If you read any of these books, let me know in the comments. I'd love to discuss them with you. I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!